Hey there, welcome to video number 3. This is Dr. Avinash, and in this video we are going to continue where we left off last time. Till the last session we had finished drugs acting on the outer cell wall and the DNA replication. This time we are going to have a look at drugs that attack the protein synthesis machinery of the bacteria. For this to happen properly, we need to understand the protein synthesis that is happening in the bacteria. Okay, so let's start with protein synthesis. The step number 1 of protein synthesis, of course, is conversion of DNA to mRNA, and that mRNA is ready. Here it is represented by that reddish line in the bottom. Okay, the moment mRNA comes out of the nucleus, or in case of a bacteria there is no nucleus, once the mRNA is formed, the small subunit of ribosome, the 30S subunit of ribosome, sticks to that mRNA. Simple enough. Now the moment this 30S subunit ribosome sticks, the first codon is read. The first codon in most of the bacteria, most of the RNAs actually, is AUG. It's the start codon, right? The start codon AUG codes for methionine in human beings and other mammals, higher animals, whereas in bacteria it codes for formyl methionine. So if the codon is AUG, the correct tRNA with the corresponding or complementary anticodon approaches this mRNA small subunit assembly. I hope you got it. RNA came out, it attached to the small subunit of ribosome, the first codon was read, and the first codon attracted the first tRNA with the correct anticodon, and it got stuck here. The moment it sticks here, the large subunit, the 50S subunit of ribosome arrives and joins this entire complex, right? And the moment this happens, on the large and the small subunit together, 3 distinct sites are formed. The place where the first tRNA is still sticking, is still attached, is called as the P site. P for promoter. P for promoter. The site to the right is called as the A site or the acceptor, and the site to the left is called as the E site or the exit site. Simple. So it's acceptor, promoter and exit. APE. Now, this is what happens. The second codon is now read. Now, as you read the second codon, the second tRNA, correct tRNA with the complementary anticodon comes and it attaches. Where did it attach? To the A site. Now, the moment this happens, using some ATP, the first amino acid is put on top of the second amino acid and a peptide bond is formed. Are you getting it? So the first amino acid got promoted, hence promoter site. Simple. Now, the entire large and small subunit shifts by 1 codon. The mRNA does not move. The mRNA remains where it is. The subunits move. Now, as they move, even the tRNAs don't move. The mRNAs don't move. Only the subunits move. So what happens is, what was there at the P site automatically shifts to E site. What was there at the A site shifts to the P site, and the A site again becomes empty. Simple enough. Again the codon would be read. Again a new tRNA comes in with the correct amino acid. Again there will be formation of a peptide bond. These two will get promoted on top of this. So there will be phenylalanine, valine and methionine. Getting the idea, right? So this is how new chain will be formed at the A site, acceptor site, because the promoter will keep on promoting. And what is happening to the tRNA, the empty tRNA at the E site? It is getting exited, it is thrown out. Now this process continues and continues and continues and continues till the time the last codon is read. Now the last codon is usually a termination codon or a stop codon. The moment the termination codon is read or the stop codon is read, a tRNA does not come in. Instead, a factor called as the release factor comes in. This release factor attaches to the A site, and because of the release factor, this entire assembly starts to break apart. So the large subunit goes away, the small subunit goes away, the release factor eventually goes away. This bond between the tRNA and the amino acid chain breaks. So the amino acid chain goes away. That's a polypeptide chain. And the tRNA goes away. And that's how the protein synthesis starts and stops. If you have understood it, great. Congratulations. You have understood one of the most basic but one of the most important things for antimicrobials. Moving on then to my first topic for this video, erythromycin. It's derived from a fungus called as Streptomyces erythraeus. It was prepared as an alternative to penicillin, and it works amazingly on gram-positive and few gram-negative bacteria. So this is more gram-positive again, less of gram-negative. It works on Streptococcus pyogenes, Streptococcus pneumoniae, Neisseria gonorrhoeae, Clostridium, Corynebacterium, Listeria, and so on and so forth. Some bacteria which are not killed by penicillin can also be killed by erythromycin. So that's a bonus. These bacteria, and this is something that you have to by heart, include Campylobacter jejuni, Legionella, Branhamella, Cataralis, Gardnerella vaginalis, and Mycoplasma. All these are also killed by erythromycin. The mechanism of action is very simple. The bacteria, like a fool, takes up erythromycin, not erythrocyte. So the bacteria has an uptake pump. It brings erythrocyte inside. Actually, erythrocyte, I'm so sorry. So let's talk about the mechanism of action. Okay. Erythromycin actually enters the bacterial cell better in gram-positive bacteria because the interior of bacterial cell is more alkaline. Okay. Erythromycin actually works better in alkaline medium. Now, as the bacteria uptakes erythromycin, it combines with the 50S ribosome subunit. And once it binds there, it interferes with the translocation. It does not allow the ribosomes to move. Now you would also realize that if the ribosomes fail to move on the mRNA, how can you read the next codon? If you can't read the next codon, will there be protein synthesis? No, the protein synthesis will stop and the protein synthesis fails, and that's how erythromycin kills. Erythromycin is acid labile. So we have to give them in a special kind of a capsule called as enteric coated capsule. So these capsules dissolve only in the alkaline environment of the intestine, not in the acidic environment of the stomach. Now why this is important is because when you prescribe this medicine, sometimes to children and all, they don't want to eat capsule. So when they don't want to eat capsule, you know what parents do? They open the capsule, they remove the powder inside, they mix it with milk or something and they give. You have to tell the parents, don't do this with erythromycin, it will become useless, it is acid labile. Bacteria have also become smart. They have started developing pumps to throw away erythromycin. So erythromycin goes in them and it is then thrown out. Not only that, some bacteria are so amazing that they have made erythromycin esterase, an enzyme that can break erythromycin. And some of them have taken resistance to an amazing level. They have changed the ribosome only. They have used an enzyme called as methylase, and by using this enzyme methylase, they have altered the ribosomal binding site. So erythromycin now cannot bind to the ribosomal assembly and protein synthesis does not stop. Okay. Now not just the ribosomal binding site, some bacteria have changed their entire ribosomes only to protect themselves from erythromycin. Now out of these four mechanisms, the first three, efflux pump, the esterase enzyme, and by methylation method changing the ribosomal binding site. They are all resistances by plasmids. Whereas the altered ribosome is a chromosomal mutation, which logically says that the first three are much more likely to spread among bacteria, the last one probably not. You will remember erythromycin by its category, the ADRs of erythromycin by the name of its category. Erythromycin falls under macrolide drug category. The chapter name is macrolide in your textbook. You should remember macrolide as the side effects of erythromycin. Erythromycin is known to stimulate the motilin receptor. So it can increase GIT contraction and motility. So some kind of loose motion and increased peristalsis can happen. A stands for allergies and arrhythmias. C stands for bile stasis or cholestasis. So a little bit of jaundice might happen. R for rash, reversible ototoxicity. Li for liver damage. D for drug interactions with serum valproate levels increasing, carbamazepine levels increasing, warfarin and theophylline levels increasing. So be careful when you are combining erythromycin with somebody on CBZ or valproate. CBZ is carbamazepine, okay? So be careful. And E stands for eosinophilia, which means increase in eosinophil count. Now again, as I explained to you in the last video, this is a mnemonic for ADRs. You have to go through the textbook to get the language correct. This will help you in remembering, but the textbook will help you in writing your answers. So be careful, write your answers from the textbook. And this beautiful, delicious, pure white chocolate will help us remember the uses of erythromycin. A pure, delicious white chocolate. A for atypical pneumonia, P for pharyngitis, pneumonias and other infections by pneumococcus, delicious, D for diphtheria, white whooping cough, T for tetanus and C for chancroid. Good mnemonic to remember all the actions. Write it down, stick it in your textbook so you don't forget, but important again, let me repeat it for you. Go through the textbook to get the correct pharmacological language so that you can write correct, long, beautiful answers in your exams. Simple enough. Now, apart from these, erythromycin is used as an alternative to penicillin in STD, syphilis, tetanus and diphtheria. See, ideally penicillin should be given, but if somebody is allergic to penicillin but has syphilis, has tetanus or has diphtheria, erythromycin would be my second alternative. Simple, easy to remember. And again, because the mnemonic is STD, there is a third STD, bonus STD, gonorrhea. So even penicillin can be used to treat gonorrhea. Here in this case, alternate is erythromycin. Simple enough. Now, since we are on protein biosynthesis and we have understood how the protein synthesis works, and if you have not, please go back to the start of this video and again have a look at it of how these things work. Let me talk about two very important medications, tetracyclines and chloramphenicol. Tetracycline and chloramphenicol, both of them are bacteriostatic. They don't kill, they put the bacteria on pause mode. Erythromycin kills, tetracycline stops, chloramphenicol stops. The idea is stop the replication of bacteria and hope that the patient's WBC do the remaining work. The idea is to control the infection so that WBCs can work. So these are not great drugs for somebody who is immunocompromised. Okay, we have to have good immune system, like at least a decent fair amount of immune system working for tetracycline and chloramphenicol to work. The difference is going to be this. Tetracycline binds to 30S ribosome, where the amino acyl tRNA was going to bind to the A site. That site where the new amino acyl tRNA comes in, the A site, that's where tetracycline stops protein synthesis. New tRNA cannot come in. See, with erythromycin, the translocation was lost, the bacteria could not read the next codon. Here, reading has been done. new tRNA cannot come in. That's how tetracyclines stop protein synthesis. Chloramphenicol, on the other hand, binds to 50S ribosome near A site, not the A site, near A site. And by doing that, it stops that peptide bond formation. Remember that step where the amino acids on the tRNA attached at the P site were getting transferred to the amino acid attached to the A site? That step where the peptide bond formation takes place between the P site and the A site, that is stopped. So the transfer does not happen, the tRNA, the protein chain is not being formed, and as a result the protein synthesis stops. Three different actions, right? First, can't read. Second, can read, tRNA cannot come in. Third, tRNA came in, cannot transfer the amino acid chain, peptide bond cannot be formed. Now here you need to know the following questions. Classify fluoroquinolones, do an LAQ of erythromycin, have a look at mechanism of action of tetracycline, chloramphenicol and aminoglycoside. These are the important questions that we are going to target. Okay, so let me help you out with them first, shall we? And then move ahead. So let's discuss these drugs in detail. Okay, tetracyclines first. Why do you call these drugs tetracycline? Look at the chemical representation of this medicine. It is 4 cyclic compounds. So it's a tetracycline, 4 cyclic rings in it. All tetracyclines are mildly bitter solids. They're slightly water soluble, and their hydrochlorides are more soluble in water. Their aqueous solution is unstable. All tetracyclines have the same antimicrobial activity. The only difference is the newer tetracyclines have more lipid solubility, greater potency, and some other minor differences. Otherwise, most tetracyclines are same. Tetracyclines are bacteriostatic. We already understood the mechanism of action. Sensitive bacteria have a mechanism, an energy-dependent transport mechanism, where they pick up tetracycline from their environment, and the bacteria is literally like screwing itself up. The bacteria is killing itself. It's like kind of committing a huge mistake by using an energy dependent transport to pull in tetracycline. The more newer generations, the more lipid soluble ones, can even enter a bacteria by simple diffusion, and they enter gram negative bacteria by pore-in channels. Let's talk about the ADRs and uses. And for ADRs and uses, we are going to get help from Mr. Kapil Dev, who is going to vacuum for us. So vacuum our rooms. So the ADRs and the uses have to be remembered by the mnemonic Shri Kapil Dev. Uses would be vacuum bedroom 2. So let's talk about the ADR, Shri Kapil Dev. S for super infections. These medicines are broad spectrum antimicrobials. Broad spectrum antimicrobials can destroy all the good bacteria on our body, allowing other harmful, dangerous bacteria to establish themselves, causing super infection. K for kidney damage, A for anti-anabolic. So if given for a long period of time, these drugs will actually cause catabolism. The patient might become thinner and thinner. P for phototoxicity, I for insipidus, that's diabetes insipidus, L for liver damage, D for dentition issue, E for epigastric pain, nausea, vomiting and diarrhea, and V for vestibular toxicity. So easy, right? Now in our textbooks, the adverse effects are classified as irritative effects, and the second thing is organ toxicity. That is how they have divided it. The third one they have written is hypersensitivity, and fourth one is super infection. So you can go that way or you can go this way. Everything is fine. super infections because they suppress the resident flora, as I said, and infection by Candida albicans is most common. In intestine, pseudomembranous enterocolitis can happen. Okay, Pseudomonas proteus, they can overgrow. Okay. Hypersensitivity, it's infrequent but can present as skin rash and glossitis, pruritus, pruritus of the anal region and the vulva, very common. Very rarely even exfoliative dermatitis have reported. Okay, so that is one. Minocycline, vestibulotoxicity, vertigo, nystagmus. So I'm just recalling all the important points and helping you out. Now, this point on development of teeth, dentition issue has to be emphasized a little bit more. Tetracyclines are kind of chelators. They can remove calcium. Okay, not remove calcium, bind to calcium. Now, here's the problem. Once your teeth are formed and they're out in your jaw, nothing can happen because of tetracycline. But imagine a developing tooth. A developing tooth which is still having a lot of blood supply around it, especially in the crown part. Let's say intrauterine life. See, the primary dentition is formed during the 5th month of intrauterine life. Okay, and the secondary dentition, which means permanent teeth, are actually developing. They start to develop around 3 months after the child is born, right till 6 years of age. So imagine a condition in which a woman who is pregnant, 5 months pregnant, and she is given tetracycline. This calcium tetracycline combination will get deposited in the developing teeth and bone. And this combination is not white. The calcium tetracycline chelate or tetracycline combination is brown. And that means the teeth of this child would be brown, discolored, ill-formed and susceptible to caries. Same thing will happen if the child is given tetracyclines between 3 months and 6 years of age. Here the permanent teeth will get affected, especially the crown of anterior dentition. And one-off dose is not really the problem. Like continuously giving them is really a big problem. Okay. Any other thing that you have to remember? Yeah, in our textbook, this kidney damage is given as a reversible Fanconi syndrome-like condition is produced by outdated or degraded tetracycline. Please underline that in your textbook. That's an MCQ. Degraded tetracyclines have epitetracycline and hydrotetracycline, and epi and hydrotetracycline, which damage the PCT, proximal tubular cells of the kidney. Now, please go through the textbook and underline whatever I probably gave you extra, like I just spoke about. It's not on the screen for you, but you get the point. Just get it done with. Simple enough? Cool. Let's move on to the uses then. Vacuum bedroom 2. V acts against Vibrio cholerae. A is given for acne and actinomyces. C for chlamydia and clostridia. U for urea plasma urealyticum. M for mycoplasma pneumoniae. B for Lyme's disease, Borrelia burgdorferi. R for rickettsia, and T for tularemia. I know I am giving you very short, beautiful, easy to remember mnemonics, and you can thank me later for it. But the more important thing is, at this point of time, I hope you have your textbooks open so that you can see that what I have said are kind of the headings to give you good marks. In your textbook, the first point given is actually empirical therapy, where you don't know what the organism is and you can't guess it also, give tetracycline. It's not a dependable empirical treatment for serious infections, but for mixed infection, we can give it in combination with beta-lactam antibiotic or an aminoglycoside antibiotic or a cephalosporin or fluoroquinone. So you can combine this with any other medicine and give it and hope that the patient does not get any problem. Plus the venereal diseases such as lymphogranuloma venerum, granuloma inguinale, and chlamydia non-specific urethritis is also mentioned in your textbook. The rest of the uses are given in smaller words. That would be really good to know. Let's talk chloramphenicol. Okay, chloramphenicol, we already know how it works. It was found, in a bacteria, not in bacteria, in a fungus. It was from a fungus, Streptomyces venezuelae. Chloramphenicol looks something like this. You don't need to know the chemical structure, but we know that it is bacteriostatic. It binds with the 50S ribosome and it prevents the transfer of the elongating peptide chain to the newly attached amino acid tRNA, and that causes stoppage of protein synthesis. The easiest way to remember the uses of chloramphenicol is bare TB. B for bacterial meningitis, A for anaerobic infections, R for rickettsia, E for eye and ear infections, and TB stands for typhoid and brucellosis. Easy, simple. Well, for side effects, you remember Hulk. He's the big superhero, right? So that's B for bone marrow depression, I for irritative effect, G for gray baby syndrome, superhero is for super infection, and H for hypersensitivity. Very, very easy to understand, very, very easy to remember. Okay. Now, we know the mechanism. The resistance is more or less like the tetracycline part. Okay. There's this R factor, resistance factor, especially in Salmonella typhi, because of which Salmonella typhi, which once upon a time was so susceptible to chloramphenicol, now is becoming resistant and decreasing the permeability. That's easy to understand. This gray baby syndrome needs a little elaboration. This happens when high doses of chloramphenicol were given to neonates, in premature neonates, prophylactically, to prevent any infections in them. So this happened once upon a time, nobody does it now, but there was this theory that when a premature baby is there, we need to protect it from infections, so give chloramphenicol. When this was given in high doses, more than 100 mg per kg, the baby stopped feeding, it started vomiting, it became hypotonic and hypothermic, it started becoming cold, the abdomen was distended, the respiration became irregular, and the entire body developed ashen grey cyanosis, like ash-like grey plus bluish color. This was followed by cardiovascular collapse and unfortunately death. On post-mortem, we found blood lactate level was pretty raised. It was suggested that chloramphenicol could not be metabolized and excreted by these newborn babies, and hence chloramphenicol is banned in children. No to chloramphenicol in children. The bone marrow depression also needs a little bit explanation. Let me help you out with it. Bone marrow depression does not happen in all, but it is more common with chloramphenicol than with any other antibiotic. And it will cause depression of bone marrow, which means all blood cells, RBC will be low, aplastic anemia, WBC will be low, agranulocytosis will happen, platelets will be low, thrombocytopenia would be there, or pancytopenia in short. There are two presentations. One is called as non-dose related, idiosyncratic. This is an unpredictable, serious and fatal problem, which is because of a genetic basis. The patient has a genetic issue because of which chloramphenicol became more toxic. And even if they survive, these people will get leukemias later on. And the second way of bone marrow suppression in chloramphenicol is dose and duration related. So more the dose, longer the duration, then there is a direct toxic effect. A much more predictable effect on the bone marrow. And this happens because of inhibition of mitochondrial enzyme synthesis in the RBC producing cells. It is reversible, and unlike non-dose related idiosyncratic reaction, the dose and duration dependent one does not have any long-term complications. And this is what you need to remember as far as chloramphenicol is concerned. Now what is the next action step? Please go through tetracyclines, chloramphennicols. Go through question bank if you have any, and let me know if there is any other topic from these antimicrobials that need my help. I will be more than happy to help you. Go through your microbiology textbooks, go through the life cycle of entamoeba histolytica, life cycle of malaria, a little bit of mycology, general features of viruses. It will help you in the upcoming sessions. Okay, so this is an additional homework I would love to give to you. Now, because we are talking protein synthesis, I want to continue this video and talk about aminoglycosides with you. Now, what are aminoglycosides and why do you have to do it properly? Well, aminoglycosides are natural and semi-synthetic antibiotics. They have a polybasic amino group linked to a glycosidic to two or more amino sugars. Do you need to know this? No, I just wanted to give you a good introduction of why this is called as aminoglycosides, because they have a glycosidic bond in it and they have amino groups in it, and they have amino sugars, so aminoglycosides. And just like penicillin, which was like unlike penicillin actually, which was a chance discovery, aminoglycosides were sought after. They were like not discovered by accident, they were found. How does this aminoglycoside antibiotic work? Well, there are quite a few aminoglycosides in our syllabus that you need to know. 7, 8 to be precise. The mechanism of action is the same for all of them. Aminoglycoside acts by blocking protein synthesis. Now, it happens in two steps. The first is transport of aminoglycoside, represented here with this black dot, into the bacterial cell, and then so bacterial cell will mean through the bacterial cell wall, through the cytoplasmic membrane, and once inside, binding to ribosome and inhibiting protein synthesis. Now, this transport of aminoglycoside is a very unique concept that you should remember, so that it helps you a little bit more in writing your answers. Okay. This is a multi-step process, this transport. They will go from outer coat of gram-negative bacteria through the porin channels, and from the periplasmic space, they enter via a carrier-mediated mechanism. So step number 1 in gram-negative bacteria is basically porin channel. Step number 2 is crossing the cytoplasmic membrane in a carrier-mediated manner, and this carrier is linked to electron transport chain, which means that if gram-negative bacteria have to have these medicines, these molecules of aminoglycoside inside them, their electron transport chain should be functioning. And when does electron transport chain work? When there is a polarized membrane. There should be positivity outside, negativity inside. Only then electron transport chain can work. And then this is also requiring oxygen. So this is an oxygen dependent active process. So in anaerobic condition, will aerobic processes work? No. So these processes don't work. And the anaerobic condition, that's the reason why anaerobes and facultative anaerobes are not susceptible, especially in anoxia. When O2 is deficient, even facultative anaerobes will not die. Like what happens in a big abscess. Getting the idea? But when there is too much of air, oxygen, it will go very easily. Even when there is acidity, high pH, alkalinity, aminoglycosides will work 20 times better in alkaline medium as compared to acidic medium. Okay. What if you damage the cell wall a little bit? Oh, that would be a bonus, because now the bacteria does not have any option but to absorb it. Speed up of uptake of aminoglycoside will happen. So that can happen. Now, once inside the bacterial cell, the process is kind of different. Some antimicrobials like streptomycin, aminoglycoside, streptomycin will bind to 30S ribosome. Others will bind to 50S ribosome. 30-50 interface, the junction between 30 and 50. And they will either block the initiation of protein synthesis, block translation, stop the translation, like premature termination will happen, so wrong length of amino acid chain will be formed, or incorrect amino acids will be incorporated. So these are different ways, like misreading will happen, codons will not be read correctly, and this is how the protein biosynthesis probably stops. Getting the idea, right? Now, the question in your mind would be, how is it that tetracycline chloramphenicol are also acting on protein synthesis and they are static? And aminoglycosides, on the other hand, they are bactericidal. Aminoglycosides are bactericidal. This appears to be a secondary change in the integrity of bacterial cell membrane. It is suggested that the other antibiotics inhibit protein synthesis, like erythromycin, chloramphenicol, tetracycline. They only pause protein synthesis. Aminoglycoside actually block those proteins which are important for their cell membrane formation. So the bacteria become more permeable when they are exposed to aminoglycosides. Amino acids leak out, ions leak out, proteins leak out, and that's how probably the cells die. Even we just spoke about how misreading takes place, which means wrong amino acids will be incorporated in the protein. Defective proteins are formed. What would happen if defective protein enters the cell membrane? The cell membrane will become altered, right? So that happens. Okay, and even better is this concept, because the cell membrane is getting damaged, aminoglycosides enter into the bacterial cell even better. Getting it, the aminoglycoside which went in first created a wrong protein which got incorporated into the cell membrane, which made the cell membrane weak. More aminoglycosides could come in. Aminoglycosides helping other aminoglycosides, enhancing their lethal effect, and that is probably how streptomycin and other aminoglycosides work. Well, aminoglycosides have some common properties. They are all water soluble, their solutions are stable and used as sulfate salts. They ionize very easily in solution, so they cannot get absorbed orally. They stay exclusively in the extracellular fluid, they do not cross the blood-brain barrier, and they have to be given injection. They are excreted unchanged by glomerular filtration. They are all bactericidal and they act at alkaline pH. They interfere with bacterial protein synthesis. They are more active against aerobic gram-negative bacilli. And if there is resistance to one aminoglycoside, chances are there is resistance to all other aminoglycosides also. Simple. Their safety margin is narrow. So if you give too much, there will be side effects. You give too less, the bacteria will not die. So you have to give just right dose. And all of these have common side effects, which is ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. Simple, easy. Now, the bacteria does not want to die, so it will of course develop some resistance. So there is a plasmid mediated cell membrane bound modifying enzyme. The moment aminoglycoside comes in, it will be phosphorylated, adenylated or acetylated. The antibiotic loses its effect. Bacteria can do that. Create an enzyme that can do destruction of the aminoglycoside. Second, mutationally decreasing the affinity of ribosomal proteins. Change the ribosomes, aminoglycosides can't work. This is limited again, like this has not been seen too much. Third, decrease the efficiency of aminoglycoside transporting mechanism. Don't allow aminoglycoside to come in. Right? Now, as far as you are concerned, you should also know the important side effects. Okay? And the side effects we are going to talk about are ototoxicity, nephrotoxicity, and neurotoxicity or neuromuscular blockade. It's very easy to understand these toxicities. Ototoxicity is the most important adverse effects. See, some drugs will destroy the cochlear part, some will destroy the vestibular part. And this happens because the drug gets concentrated in the labyrinthine fluid. So here's the important thing that you need to remember. Ototoxicity is high when plasma concentration of drug is high. And ototoxicity is low when the plasma concentration is low. Now, ototoxicity is more when it is persistently high. So if you give high doses for 12 hours, that will be more damaging than giving super high doses for half an hour. Getting the idea? So ototoxicity is time dependent and dose dependent. Okay, so what can you do to avoid this toxicity? Either give such a low concentration that it is below the toxic level, or you give concentrated doses so that the plasma peak is high at one end and then it kind of drops down. The concentration in the plasma should not be too much. In your textbooks, they have given you cochlear damage and vestibular damage. Please have a look at it. Let me know if there's any doubt. I will be happy to help. And the nephrotoxicity part is very easy to understand. Loss of tubular cells, tubular damage. So urine cannot get concentrated, GFR decreases, nitrogen retention happens, albuminuria happens, casts. That's proteins going out of the body. That happens. So it's the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. Now, unlike ototoxicity, which is related to how much is the level of the drug in the plasma, toxicity of kidney is related to the total amount of drug received by the patient. So if you give single daily dose, less toxic than 3 times daily dose. Simple, easy, cool. As far as again neuromuscular blockade is concerned, all of these medicines can reduce acetylcholine release from motor nerve endings, and it interferes with the muscle contractions. Okay. At clinical doses, this does not happen. This happens at like real high doses, but it has been observed that some doctors experimented with putting this medicine directly inside the pleura or the peritoneum, and then like streptomycin and neomycin have even caused apneas and death. So especially if the patient was on Curare like muscle relaxant. So be very careful, don't give this in intraperitoneal or pleural routes for any reason, especially during surgeries. So have a look at this. They might ask you this in your vivas or in your theory also. Let's proceed further then. I'll give you a set of few points, to be precise 6 important points of every single drug. You must know these 6 important points. Now, as I keep on telling you again and again, you have to go through the textbook so that you know what to write. Okay, having information is not enough. You need to know how to elaborate that information, right? So the first one is streptomycin. This was the first aminoglycoside discovered. The source of streptomycin is Streptomyces griseus. This is less potent. Currently it is used for TB. It is a narrow spectrum antimicrobial. It works on aerobes and preferably gram-negative bacteria. It has the lowest nephrotoxic potential, and out of ototoxicity, it is more vestibulotoxic. Compare this with kanamycin, the second aminoglycoside discovered. This was from Streptomyces kanamyceticus. This is less potent, more toxic, and we use it in TB, not against Pseudomonas. This is nephrotoxic, yes it is, and it is both cochleotoxic and vestibulotoxic, but it is more cochleotoxic. The third was gentamicin. Now remember the trick here, this is very important. Whatever ends with MICIN, they were discovered from Micromonospora purpurae. This is the third generation the third aminoglycoside discovered, higher potency, broader spectrum, and it is used in acute infections by aerobic gram-negative bacilli and some gram-positive bacteria. Gentamicin is useless against tuberculosis. It is nephrotoxic and ototoxic both. Tobramycin, this is fourth aminoglycoside discovered. This is Streptomyces from Streptomyces tenebrarius. The potency is exactly like Genta. It's just 2 to 4 times more potent against Proteus and Pseudomonas. So we love this for Pseudomonal infections, and it is lesser nephrotoxic and lesser ototoxic than gentamicin. So this is slightly better. Then comes amikacin. Well, amikacin is the fifth of the aminoglycosides that were discovered. It's a semi-synthetic derivative of kanamycin. Okay, and just like kanamycin, the potency is there, but it is resistant to those inactivating enzymes we spoke about. It has the widest spectrum, but for Pseudomonas, Proteus and Staphylococcus, it requires higher doses. It is nephrotoxic, and again this is more cochleotoxic than vestibulotoxic. Sisomycin is the sixth aminoglycoside, 1980s, from Micromonospora inyoensis. Just like Genta, but more potent on Pseudomonas, gram-negative bacillus and beta hemolytic streptococcus combined with penicillin. It is amazing for subacute bacterial endocarditis. Unfortunately, it is susceptible to inactivating enzymes. the potential to cause nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity is exactly like gentamicin. And the last medicine I want to talk to you guys about is netilmicin. This is synthetic or semi-synthetic derivative of gentamicin, 7th aminoglycoside, broader spectrum, more resistance, everything else is same as genta. Simple. Now, this is what is really, really important. You have to go back to streptomycin, the first one. Open up a book and write down these 6 properties, like 7 drugs, 6 properties of each one of them. Make a table and write it down and stick it in your textbook, because that will help you in super duper fast revision. Now once you know this, then you open the textbook and then you go through every single one, and you will realize how you can create an answer, and a big answer, out of just these 6 points that I have been talking to you about. Getting it? Very, very easy. Another question that they usually ask you in your vivas is, what is soframycin, which is kind of a very famous skin antiseptic. It is framicetin. It's obtained from Streptomyces lavandulae. It is just like neomycin, but it is too toxic for systemic administration, and hence we use it only on the skin, ear, eyes, just like neomycin. This arbacacin, this paramomycin given in your textbooks, don't have to go through them. I hope you have understood this. Let me know if there's any doubt with any of the topics related to drugs acting on the protein synthesis mechanism. Okay? This is where I stop. Go through this, please. I will see you in the next video, and in the next one we are going to talk about sulfonamides and cotrimoxazole. Till the next time, take care, keep studying, bye.